So thanks everybody for coming to our Rose meeting. It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Erin Dolan. Erin did her bachelor's at Wellesley in biology. She did her PhD in neuroscience at UC San Francisco. But after her PhD, she transitioned into education and outreach, first as the director of the biotech project at the University of Arizona, and later with faculty appointments at Virginia Tech, University of Texas, and now at the University of Georgia, where she currently is. She has more than 40 peer-reviewed papers, and she was the chief editor of the leading journal in the biology education field, CBE Life Sciences Education, for 10 years. She's managed millions of dollars in grants from NSF, NIH, and others. And I don't think it's an overstatement to say that she's had a huge impact on sort of the spread of sort of interest in biology pedagogy and active learning over the last decade or so. So it's, like I said, it's really my great pleasure to introduce her, and can't wait to hear her talk today. Undergraduate research at scale. What if the treatment is a cure? So.
Thanks so much, Jeff, and I hope your expectations aren't too high as a result of that very generous introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you all for making time today. How's everyone doing? Are you hanging in there? Thumbs up, like so-so. You showed up and that's a victory. That's okay. I understand that. I know it's a tough time of the semester and a remarkably tough time in life. So I appreciate your taking a few minutes to join me today. And I appreciate the Rose Network and UAB for the kind invitation to talk with you a little bit. So before I pull up my slides, I just want to get a sense of who's online. So would you mind, and also just check everyone's technology a little bit, would you mind posting in the chat? Are you an undergrad, grad student, staff member, faculty member? I'm trying to get a sense of who's online. Okay, so good range of folks. Oh, and thanks, actually. So the next thing I was going to ask you is to put in what you might identify as your closest discipline or disciplines. So I see a couple of folks said they were biologists, biology education research, some in neuroscience, okay, psychology. Oh, fisheries, right on. Cool. Okay, so nice group, lots of different perspectives. So I'm excited to talk with you all today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm on. Yeah, all good. All right, can you all see me okay? Can you see the? And we're going to make pretty active use of that chat. So go ahead and keep that open. So as Jeff mentioned, I'm going to talk with you about undergraduate research at scale. What if the treatment is a cure? And if y'all are on Twitter, feel free to tweet out. Those are my two Twitter handles, Erin Dolan 1, and then CureNet, which is a network of people and programs similar to Rose. But this network is focused on course-based undergraduate research experiences. So if you hear something that resonates and you want to give a shout out on Twitter, please do. Okay. So undergraduate research experiences. This is something that lots and lots of high profile organizations are advocating for and supporting, everything from the National Science Foundation to the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the AAAS. How many folks are familiar with the Vision and Change report? So go ahead and just like type a thumbs up or, yep, familiar, some folks familiar. Okay. Anyone not heard of that? Okay, so I've got a couple of no's. So this, for folks who are not familiar, thank you for telling me that. The Vision and Change report is basically a guiding document generated by lots of folks in the undergraduate biology education community saying what undergraduate biology education should look like. And one of the things that this report emphasized was that research experiences should be an integral component of biology education for all students. And I want to point out that we're not talking about all biology majors, we're talking about all biology students. Just 1 second. We all have our own situations going on at home, all good. So what I want to know now is how many biology students are there at UAB? Can you estimate? So not biology majors, but biology students. Does anyone know? Yeah, there you go. Lots, right? This is, I mean, that's a lot of people. And so I think that a lot of the work done in this space has been really focused on biology because of there's so many people and because of this guiding document saying that research should be an integral component of undergraduate biology education. Other organizations have come at it from a high impact practice perspective. So have folks heard of AACNU? Some people have, your administrators probably have. So this is the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And so this organization has also advocated for undergraduate research as one of the 10 high impact educational practices, in addition to experiences like internships and externships and study abroad. So why is that? Why is that? To get us thinking about why undergraduate research is being advocated, championed so intensively, let's do a little brainstorming in the chat. How do students benefit from participating in research? So go ahead and take a minute and then type in the chat. What do students get out of participating in research? Okay, understanding of how scientific knowledge is generated, skills with a Z, very cool. Prepares them, prepares them hands-on, maybe better attention in STEM. It gets them to think more about what they know, what they don't know, development of a scientific identity, team building, absolutely. So working with other people who might be interested in the kinds of things they're interested in, knowledge, skills, real world experience, better appreciation for what STEM disciplines are about or what research is about. Also some lower reality check that data are not always so clean, that what they learn in maybe traditional lab courses is not actual reality. And that actually gets to Christina's point about troubleshooting. So when you actually do real experiments or real investigations instead of investigations that have been set up for you to be successful in achieving a particular result, you realize that it's not quite so straightforward. And sometimes you actually have to figure things out. In fact, almost always you have to figure things out. So this is a great list of benefits. And really, lots of research has examined how students benefit from participating in research. And they fit into, these benefits sort of fit into 4 big categories. So the first is knowledge and skills, and several of you mentioned that. The second is attitudes and dispositions. And some of you got at this idea of, understanding what science is and how science is done. And even if folks, don't grow up to be researchers or scientists, they at least understand the value of science. Maybe they vote for legislators or support legislation or funding for research, even if they choose not to pursue it as a career themselves. Several of you mentioned this idea of identity and also forming professional connections that might help students clarify their career interests and pursue those career paths. And that's that final point of figuring out, do I actually want to do more education or a career that involves doing research? Okay, so lots of potential benefits. So this raises a question: if these experiences are so beneficial, who gets access to these research experiences? So how many of you did research as an undergrad? So I see a couple hands, a couple thumbs up. Some yes, some no. How many of y'all work with undergraduate researchers? Do folks work with undergraduate researchers? Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about, given all those benefits, who gets access to undergraduate research? So if you did undergraduate research yourself, how did you get access to that research experience? What did you have to do to actually get access to that experience? And if you work with undergraduate researchers, how did you find them? Okay, so Sarah says emailing. So you just even brute force, email a bunch of faculty or reaching out to faculty. Oh, being in a program that set you up with a mentor. Oh, interesting. You were in a program that required it. Okay, so some folks are mentioning mentorship or requirements. So knowing that research is a thing and going to a faculty member's office and saying, I'd like to talk about their research, had to seek it out, Diane. So I have those flashbacks as well, where I'm like, oh, okay, so it was a different landscape back when I was in college. Even though I was at a small college, you still had to seek those experiences out. And yeah, is it Bree? I hope I'm saying your name right. Had to seek it out. And people even have to seek it out today. So at big institutions, if you're talking about lots of students, there's plenty of situations where undergrads have to seek those experiences out. And that means that they need to know what research is, they need to know that it's worthwhile, and then they have to have sort of the confidence or the chutzpah to go up to a faculty member and say, hey, can I work with you? And also the ability to persevere when they don't get a response from a faculty member. So from a theoretical perspective, this can be explained in terms of Bourdieu's theory of capital. And there's really, oh, that's great. I didn't know what your theory was. Oh, that's great. Okay, I'm interested to learn more about that, Christina. Thanks for sharing. These three forms of capital really comprise how people get access to limited commodities. So I'm not really talking in capital terms about sort of economic capital. I'm talking about access to this limited commodity. And in our case here, we're talking about the limited commodity of undergraduate research. So the first form of capital that helps students get access to research is the human capital, the sort of what you know. So these would be the kinds of things that you might put on a resume or on a transcript so that you did certain courses, so you have some knowledge, you got certain grades, maybe you have certain test scores, or even prior experiences. I don't know, has anyone worked with a high school student who had, or a student who had research experience as a high school student? Yeah, it happens, right? I mean, especially with scientists having kids, they, provide access. So it could be that students come with this human capital. Another form of capital is this how you know, and I'm actually a really good example of this. This is the kinds of things that you accumulate by being in a context that that really embeds you in a particular culture. So my dad is an engineer. He was a faculty member at University of Washington for 20 years. So parents are overeducated, and I always hung with STEM professionals because that's who my parents' friends were. And so for me to seek out a research experience in STEM was like talking to my dad's friends. So I wasn't nervous about approaching a faculty member in the way that someone who maybe doesn't have that kind of cultural capital would be. Another form of cultural capital you may be aware of is when students ask questions like a scientist or seem eager about your research. So they sort of know the rules of the game for getting access to a research experience. And then finally, there's the who you know. And several of you pointed out that you were parts of programs or majors that required research experience. So it's really built into your social structure. And several of you also mentioned mentors. So maybe you had an agent, an individual who served to give you access to that capital, either by inviting you to do research with them or by saying, hey, I don't have access to a research opportunity for you, but I know someone who does. And so what we know is that students who come to college with these forms of capital get access to research experiences, which means that they then form additional human capital, right? They learn more about research, they develop their knowledge and skills. They develop more cultural capital, so they develop connections, they understand how scientists go about their work, and then they develop more social capital that then becomes this feedback loop of capital development. So what that means is students who come to college primed for careers in science are most likely to persist and succeed. And I'm a really good example of this. The problem with that is it really recapitulates the status quo. It means that the people who are primed to get access to research experiences are the ones who are going to comprise the next generation of researchers. So what we really need to do is think about how do we achieve these outcomes for everyone? And that's really what I've been passionate about for quite some time. When I came to realize my own privilege over the course of my own professional experience. So one of the main ways that we can accomplish this is through a type of instruction called course-based undergraduate research experiences. And several of you made reference to this in the chat, and you may be familiar with this term. I know that you have some cures already in place at UAB, which is great. So the way that I define cures is when a whole class of students, so everyone enrolled in the class, addresses a research question or problem, or a set of research questions or problems that are of interest to the broader scientific community. And I put the word scientific in there, but really what I mean is stakeholders outside the classroom. So that could be stakeholders on campus, that could be stakeholders in a local watershed group, that could be other people doing research in the discipline, but somebody outside the classroom is going to benefit from the scientific work that students are doing. So let's look at how cures compare to research internships. Obviously, they differ in scale. So research internships, I don't know, folks who have undergrads in their lab, how many undergrads do you have in your lab at a time? 2 or 3? Oh, well, up to 5. Okay. Yeah, there you go. COVID is definitely making a difference. So maybe up to 5. Now think about how many students are typically enrolled in a lab course. You guys have like maybe 18 to 30, something like that. Some are as small as 18, but some as large as 28 or 30. Yeah, there you go. So the scale is really different. The structure then has to be different. So a research internship is often a one-to-one versus a structure of one to many students. So one instructor to many students. The enrollment is different. So students who are in research internships are often either the self-selecting or selected few who seek out those experiences. Whereas the students who are in a cure are all the students who enroll in the course. And this can be both a benefit because everyone gets involved, but also can be a challenge from the instructor's perspective, because that means that students may be signing up for a course and they may not necessarily be interested in research. And they might not know that that's what they're signing up for. And so we have to appeal to a broader range of students who are signing up for our courses when we teach a cure. The timing is different. So in a research internship, students typically invest time outside of class, which means that students who have other obligations, family obligations, jobs, et cetera, often aren't able to participate in research internships. Whereas the timing of cures is in class. So the time that the students are spending earning credit toward their degree is time that they also spend doing research. The settings are different often. So this is not always the case, but typically internships take place in a faculty member's research group, whereas to accommodate a cure, it will be set in a teaching lab. And sometimes that means students need some convincing that they're actually doing research. I've had students in some life science cures that I've taught get to the end of the semester, turn in their papers and say, all right, now tell me the answer. And I'll say, what? What do you mean? You tell me the answer. And they're like, no, but I've done the experiment. Now, what was I supposed to find? There is no answer, but they've had so many years of training, finding the answer they're supposed to find that they find it hard to believe that I couldn't possibly know the answer, that this is actually an unknown question that they're addressing. And then finally, the mentorship, I would argue, is more consistent and structured in a cure. So I want to ask y'all, how many folks have gotten feedback about their teaching? Feedback about a course you've taught. Yeah, lots of folks, right? You have those end of course surveys, and for good or for bad, we can have a conversation later over some beverage about the value of those, what we can learn from those. But at least you get some feedback, and you get feedback from everyone involved, right? Or at least most. Yeah, exit tickets are a great idea. How many of you have gotten feedback in a systematic way about how you are as a research mentor? Or about an opportunity to give feedback to your research mentors? Yeah, It's a challenge, right? Because you can't be confidential. If you're giving feedback to your research mentor, you're getting feedback as a research mentor. It's really about that dyadic relationship. And so it's pretty hard to be honest and get feedback systematically. It's a tough thing. So what that means is that some people have really great mentoring relationships, right? Really great support from a mentor, but other folks, not so much, unfortunately. And so mentorship can really vary in a way that doesn't happen, I think, as much in a cure because there are processes in place for ongoing improvement and feedback. Okay, so given all these differences, do they work? Basically, can we achieve the same kinds of outcomes from a cure that we can achieve from an undergraduate research internship? So I had, as Jeff mentioned, the privilege of spending a couple years at the University of Texas at Austin. And they have probably one of the longest standing and largest cure programs. It's called the Freshman Research Initiative. How many folks have heard of this? Have you heard of this? Okay, so a couple yeses and a couple no's. Perfect. I'll tell you a little bit about it and why I think it's such a cool program. And I did not invent it, so I can brag on it, which is great. So the way the Freshman Research Initiative works is like this. Imagine that one faculty member's research program is like one of these circles. And they have projects within their research program that are led by maybe grad students or postdocs or advanced undergrads. And they might collaborate with other faculty. This is probably not entirely accurate of how science is done now, but mostly you have these, various projects that are individual people or teams of people work on. So what they do is they take one of the projects that would benefit from many minds and hands. Often these are projects that require examining new variables or allow for exploring new research directions. So they might be sort of high risk, high reward, or something that needs lots of iterations such that many students involved could actually accomplish the work in a way that individual students, like grad students or postdocs, wouldn't be able to accomplish. And what they do is they basically make a class out of it. And that class enrolls students for 2 semesters. So they come in, and the students come in their freshman year. They tour the different research options. And then the second semester of their freshman year, they join what's called a research stream. And the research stream is focused on that project that's related to a faculty member's ongoing work. And they work on that research in their stream for 2 semesters, spring semester of their first year and fall semester of their second year. And in the process of doing that, they earn credit for courses that count toward their major. So let me give you an example. Say they're working on a chemistry research project. They will take the regular Gen Chem lecture course, and instead of taking the regular Gen Chem lab, they'll do this cure project. Where they're working on a chemistry faculty member's ongoing research, and they earn that Gen Chem lab credit for doing the research project instead of taking the standard Gen Chem lab. So over the past 15 years, this program has scaled up to involve about 1,000 students a year. So that's about 40% of the incoming class of the College of Natural Sciences. And it spans a lot of the disciplines in the natural sciences, even disciplines like math and physics. Yeah, I know, it's really quite impressive. And they managed to do this by scaling up over time. So they didn't try to involve 1,000 students from day one. They started with 40, and then every year they added about 100 students, so that each research stream has anywhere from 20 to 40 students, and they have about 30 streams, so that they can involve that many students every year. It's Texas, they do things big. So part of the reason they actually started this program is because Texas was experiencing a pretty massive problem with retention. So University of Texas, one of the best research universities, certainly one of the best public research universities in the country, right? And some would argue the world. Their retention rate for students who entered the College of Natural Sciences 15 years ago was 50%. And I don't mean retention in STEM disciplines, I mean retention in college. So 50% of the people that enrolled in the college graduated college, which is kind of shocking because I mean, these are some talented students. So one of the reasons this program got started was because faculty were like, this is not a good thing. What got me to stay in science? Well, it wasn't my classes, especially at the intro level, it was doing research. So what can we do that engages students in research from basically the minute they start on campus? And so faculty came up with these research projects that they then integrated into science courses at the introductory level so that students could engage in research from very early on. So what that meant, though, was that folks wanted to know, is this program having the effect that we want? Is it affecting students' graduation rates and completion of STEM majors? So that was just about the time when I was at University of Texas. And it was at that point, it was about 5 years ago now, more than 6,000 students had participated in the program and 4,000 had at least 6 years to graduate. That doesn't mean they took 6 years to graduate. That just meant 6 years had passed. So that would be enough time, according to sort of national metrics, for students to have finished their undergraduate degree. So that was one of the things that we were tasked with addressing is, does FRI influence students' graduation rates and completion of STEM majors? So how would you figure that out? What would you want to know? Okay. So one option is to say, all right, you participated and you did not. Let's compare your 4 or 5 year graduation rates or 6 year, whatever, graduation rates. What's the problem with saying participants versus non-participants? Selection. And also other things going on, right? Absolutely. So what do you think might, how could we deal with that? Like, how could we get away from self-selection? What factors might affect whether someone decides to seek out a research experience or not? Okay. So not just wanting to go to grad school, they have to know that grad school is a thing. Incentives. I'm curious, Dan, what do you mean by incentives? I don't know if you feel like unmuting or typing. Oh, yeah, no, this was like actually just part of their regular curriculum. So no special incentives. Not at all, just part of the, so students who had financial need got financial aid, just like in any, but there wasn't any special incentives besides that. So we had to get away from this self-selection problem, right? So all that human capital, cultural capital, social capital that students come to college with. So what we did is we used a technique called propensity score matching. And what this allows you to do is to basically figure out the likelihood that someone would get into the program in the first place. And people get into the program 3 ways. They either get into the program because they're part of some special program. So for example, students who are in the honors program, and that's just 100 students a year, are automatically in the program. But there's only 100 honor students a year and they're all in the program. So we have no way to compare them to the non-participants. So we just actually don't even worry about the honor students. We're gonna just take them out of our sample. So that leaves about 900 students. Of those 900 students that participate in FRI each year, about 300 are actually at risk of not graduating. And we know that because they have particular characteristics. For example, certain SAT scores, certain parent education levels, certain high school math or science experiences, particular personal characteristics like gender, race, ethnicity, Pell Grant eligibility. All of these factors are predictive of leaving or staying in college. And they're also, it turned out, predictive of getting into FRI or not. So what folks did is basically use those metrics to say, all right, let's make sure that the students who are at risk of not graduating are also in the program. And so about of the 600 or so students who are predicted to not graduate each year, 300 are in the program automatically. And then the rest are on an application basis and randomly pulled from that applicant pool. But what we can do, what that means we can do is we can use these characteristics to match people. So if we take all of these characteristics for the large sample of students who could have participated in the program, and then we say which of these characteristics predicts your likelihood of being in the program, then we can find someone with an equivalent likelihood that didn't participate and match you and say, all right, now what are the graduation rates of the people who participated and the matched participants, the matched students who didn't participate. Does that make sense? So it's a kind of a handy way of taking a large data set and saying, all right, who would be equivalent? And then let's look at the outcomes for those who are equivalent so that we can hopefully get away from all of these selection factors. And once we have that smaller sample to compare, we conducted a logistic regression. We fit the data to a logistic regression model to identify the relationship between FRI participation and the likelihood of graduating from college and graduating with a STEM major. And I wouldn't be here probably talking about this if we didn't have some good results to share. So the results are, I think, so impressive for an education program. So this is the control group. So basically the matched sample of students who didn't participate in FRI. And they had about 68% a likelihood of graduating within 6 years. So that shows you already that we've got a self-selecting sample. Because remember, I told you at the time the program got started, it was about a 50% rate. So we know that these matching procedures are really important to make sure that we're making a fair comparison. If we then look at the FRI students, their likelihood of graduating is 83%. So that's actually significantly higher. And when we're talking about 1,000 students a year, that's a pretty big deal. Then if we look at graduation with a STEM major, of the students who graduated from the control sample, about 70% were retained in a STEM major. And for FRI students, 95%. Which again, if we're talking 1,000 students a year, that's a lot of students. That is a huge effect for an education program. Even cooler, the effect was the same for students from all backgrounds. So similar benefits for students of different gender identities, racial and ethnic identities, first-generation college status. The program benefited all students. And it benefited science and their faculty mentors because students published their work. So lots of student authorships. And here's just a sample of them. I think there's certainly more than 300 papers with student authors by now. So lots of benefits. Now the question is, what is it about this experience that makes it work? Because other programs, other people want to learn, how do we replicate something like this? Do we have to do it exactly like FRI? What are the key features that make it work? What might be particular to UT Austin, or what could we do at a place like University of Georgia or UAB? So that was what we started to tackle next. So I think this is our last brainstorm in the chat. It is. If you're going to design a research experience for a student, what do you think would make it effective for students? What do you hypothesize are the key features? Okay, so definitely scaffolding support. They need to care about what the results are. effective mentor, an interesting problem, some sense of ownership. Yeah. Yeah, support. It's got to be relevant to some, it's got to matter somehow. Connection to the data, why? I'm not quite clear on your question, Mary. Can you elaborate? And feel free to unmute yourself.
Well, that they would want to know.
Oh, like why? Why do I, got it. They're asking the why.
Data, why?
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Like, why am I doing this? Absolutely. And in fact, one of the things, we also study research mentoring at the graduate and undergraduate level. One of the things that students point out makes for an effective mentor is the mentor actually explains how their work fits into a bigger scientific picture. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So help with troubleshooting. Interesting. Like, or like even opportunities to troubleshoot. So we actually did some thinking about this and actually systematic review of what makes an experience like this distinctive from a traditional lab course. And we identified exactly some of the ideas, the features that you are identifying. For example, Diane just mentioned collaboration. So students may collaborate in a traditional lab course, but that collaboration is more about sort of getting the schoolwork done versus the way that scientists collaborate, which is like building off each other, give and take. You say an idea, I riff on your idea, or I argue against your idea, and you then defend your argument. So the nature of collaboration that happens in research is different than the nature of collaboration that happens for pedagogical purposes. Several of you brought the idea of relevance or discovery, that it actually, why am I collecting these data? As Mary nicely pointed out, what's the relevance? Who does this matter to? Some of you pointed out the idea of ownership, and this can actually be teased apart into two elements. Cognitive ownership, which is sort of how you think about the project. Is this my project? Do I have a sense of ownership of it? Am I invested in it intellectually? And emotional ownership, like, am I excited about it? Do I want to see the results? Can I imagine getting out of bed and doing this, as a grad student or even for a living? And then finally, several of you pointed out mentorship, the importance of guidance for mentorship. We have developed measures related to these 4 features that make cures distinctive. And we wanted to see how these distinctive features related to the kinds of outcomes we were seeing from cures. So I'm going to highlight results of a second study that was led by Lisa Corwin, who's now a faculty member at UC or CU Boulder, Stacia Rodenbush, who's at UT Austin, and Chris Runyon when he was a grad student there. And this study surveyed 23 different inquiry and cure courses in a national sample of colleges and universities. And specifically, we wanted to know from students' perspectives, to what extent your courses included these elements. Did you have opportunities to make discoveries? Did you have opportunities to do iterative work? And that's the repeating, troubleshooting, problem-solving aspects of research. Did you have opportunities to collaborate with your classmates and your instructors in carrying out the work? Did you develop a sense of ownership? And then finally, do you tend to pursue a research-related career? And so we could look at changes pre to post in whether someone intended to pursue a science research-related career before and after their course. And then we use what's called structural equation modeling to fit the data. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how to interpret that. So basically what it allows us to do is look at the relationship between these course features, collaboration, discovery, iteration, and changes in career intentions. And then it also allows us to look at whether ownership is sort of an integral part of that change in career intentions. So it allows us to figure out if, for example, if you have opportunities to discover something new, do you develop a greater sense of ownership? And does that then predict any changes in career intentions? So I'm going to show you the data, and then I'm going to walk you through how to interpret this. So the way that you interpret these data is by comparing the values on the lines. So these are standardized path coefficients. So basically they can go from a value of 0 to a value of 1. 1 means those two variables are basically completely related, and 0 means they're not related at all. If there's a dashed line, that means that's not a statistically significant relationship. Every solid line is a statistically significant relationship. So what do you notice? What seems to be the strongest relationship or the most important variable? Isn't that remarkable? Iteration. So I thought coming into this, it would be discovery. Like that's what scientists are excited about. I want to make discovery. I want to know something unknown. But what seemed to matter more is that students had an opportunity to repeat their work, to problem solve, troubleshoot, do it again, do it again, do it again. And in retrospect, that's actually not hugely surprising because that's how we think of what are called mastery experiences. When you practice something, you get better, and you practice it again, you get better. And then you're like, oh, this is a thing I can do. Look how good I am. And then you're like, oh, look how good I am. I should do a career in this. And so what was exciting to me is that this indicates that just giving students more time to iterate might actually be a key feature to a lot of the ways that we engage students in the work that they do in their discipline. That doesn't mean that discovery is unimportant. And in fact, I actually think that discovery is important for emotional ownership, but over more time. So this was just a semester of time. But think about the first time you got really exciting results. Like how long did it take you in your research to get really exciting results? Yeah, a long time, right? So students may not in the course of a semester have enough time to develop that emotional ownership of their project. I do want to point out one thing. If folks are used to looking at this kind of result, they'll know that this R² value is actually quite small, and that's not hugely surprising for an education effect. However, what that indicates is that there's other features of cures that make them a distinctive experience for shifting students' career intentions. So lots more research to be done. Research related to how students develop cognitively, affectively, in terms of their career pursuits. And something that's been pretty much neglected from studies of cures are the perspectives of other stakeholders in this experience. For example, how does research become different because we have a different pool of people who are now the researchers? How do scientists or educators who are working with students shift their own thinking and outcomes as a result of working with students in this way? I know that, I mean, at UT Austin, a whole professional promotion track has been established to accommodate the folks who are actually teaching these cures because they want to work with teams of undergrads to do research. And that's a really different kind of faculty position. And then from a societal perspective, how does this influence, especially right now, how people think about the nature of research, what research is and how research is done? So a couple of questions in the chat. So Christina asked a good question. I wonder if it's because the students felt they didn't make a discovery. Yeah, absolutely. So it may be that they felt they made progress, but not like, ta-da, like that aha moment. And I think sometimes it just takes a little bit longer. It's a good question. And we also didn't query students about whether they felt like their research was successful or not and what that meant to them. And Mary asked a question about how many hours did students spend on research per semester. So they spent so it's the same as like they would spend for a Gen Chem lab. So they would meet for 1 hour or 90 minutes a week as sort of a group meeting. And then they would come about 6 hours a week outside of lab. Or not outside of lab, how shall I say? They have an open lab concept. So students basically sign in to do research on a time that works for them. So instead of going to Gen Chem lab, they would go to the room and spend 2 or 3 hours working on their research at that time. Okay, so what I'm hoping is that by doing additional research on these experiences and what makes them distinctive, we can start linking, and I don't expect you to read this, features of how cures are designed and implemented to those proximal outcomes like ownership or skill or knowledge development that then leads to that more distal or long-term outcomes so that we can more strategically design these experiences for students. And if you're interested in, and Jeff already knows this, we actually are recruiting lab instructors for an NSF funded study to try and tease apart these other features that we think might be influencing student outcomes. So if you are teaching or you know somebody who's teaching a life science lab course, especially at the intro or mid-level during 2021, it can be in person, online, or some mix of the Q. It can be it can be a cure or not. We're looking to make recordings of lab sessions and then relate that to student outcomes from these experiences. The students would be obviously participating based on their informed consent and would receive gift cards for participating. As an instructor would receive a $50 gift card and a customized report of their results compared to aggregated results from all the 50 instructors in the study. So if that's of interest to you, do a quick screen capture or Google me at Erin Dolan at UGA, and I'd be happy to tell you more about the study. And with that, I will thank you very much for contributing actively to the chat and welcome any questions and discussion.
All right, well, let's everybody virtually thank Dr. Dolan. If you want to add your questions to the chat, or if you just want to unmute and ask a question, that would be great. Dr. Dolan has offered to stick around for a while after 1 o'clock for a few minutes if folks would like to stick around for a less formal Q&A and discussion section. So looks like we've got, I think, so Mary asked a few minutes ago, how many hours did students spend on research per semester?
Yeah, so Mary, did I answer that question enough?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sometimes people say hours, they mean like actual hours or credit hours. Oh, what does the cure look like online? So a couple of things. And actually, we've been studying remote research experiences this past summer in our EU programs and also over the fall. And people are doing different things, lots of different things. So some institutions are actually allowing students to come in staggered, sessions, socially distanced. So they do whatever wet lab work they need to do, and then they do their analytic work, their writing, their research, background research outside of lab. Some folks are doing, if students aren't allowed to come to campus, what they do is they propose what the instructor should do, and then the instructor carries out the experiment, reports the results back to them, or reports the data, I should say, back to them, gives them the data, and then they analyze the data so that they sort of have a pair of hands in the classroom. And then some have worked to computational projects entirely, for example, using existing data sets or doing computational modeling, predictive modeling, those kinds of things. So it depends really on the nature of the research that people are doing and also the local limitations on whether students can come to campus or not. So Maria asked a question about the professional path. Absolutely. So it's actually super interesting. They're calling it a clinical faculty track. So it's a non-tenure track faculty track, similar to lectures, but not lectures, because their responsibilities are to carry out research. They're sort of like, how shall I say? They're like a research scientist position with opportunities for promotions. They can go from assistant clinical professor to associate clinical professor to full clinical professor. And they have increasing appointments, right? So 1 year, 3 year, 5 year appointments. And they go through a review process like, they'd submit dossiers. And then the expectations are to do research that involves undergrads at scale. So that's what they're expected to publish. They're expected to mentor. They're expected to be effective instructors, but instructors in the context of doing research. Does that clarify a little bit? Cool. Okay. And then a question from Diane. How is students entering the lab logistically handled? Computer sign in? No, actually, believe it or not, it's just boring. Paper sign in. I personally prefer a Google Calendar. That's what I use with my own team. as I have them sign up for weekly time, so I know when to expect people who are working on different projects and provide them help. And then in general, do you know if Cure Labs cost more? So that's a really good question. We actually did a benefit cost analysis of FRI. So if you're interested in that paper, I'm happy to share it with Jeff. In fact, I may even be able to pull up the citation right quick and drop it in the chat. So the challenge with doing a benefit cost analysis is you really, I mean, so you could have more or less costs, but sometimes more costs are worth it if you have sufficient benefits, right? Hang on a second, copy bibliography, there we go. The challenge, the advantages of working online. So the nice thing about having that propensity score matching done and our analysis of the effects is that we could then monetize the benefits, right? So there's actual monetary or economic benefits of graduating from college and of pursuing a STEM degree over other types of degrees, so we could monetize that. But it does cost more. And if you look at that citation, you can actually look at the breakdown of costs. The way that they've managed that is, and actually paid for the people who are in these positions, is they brought in, first the dean invested some funding to pilot the program. That allowed them to get preliminary data to get extramural funding. Then that extramural funding allowed them to scale up the program. And remember, we've got students who are now not taking the general lab courses. So for example, they're not taking Gen Chem lab, they're not taking bio lab, intro bio lab. So that means the TAs are not needed anymore in these jobs, right? So they can take the TA ships out of the instructional budget and then allocate the instructional funds to pay for part of these people's time. And this teaching of the Cure is basically half their time. And then the other half of their time is either other teaching responsibilities, other research responsibilities, administrative responsibilities. And that's how they've managed the funding to make it sustainable. And if you're interested, on the CureNet site, there's a sustainability link that actually outlines how the program was designed to be sustainable beyond the end of grant funding. Yeah, so that hopefully gets at your questions, Christina. It's a good point. And oftentimes people use data like these to convince folks that it might be worth it. It's important that you speak to the needs and mission of your own institution or your own unit. So for example, University of Georgia, our graduation rates are over 90%. And so for me to say, we need to change graduation rates is not a very, very compelling argument. And in fact, our biochemistry major requires all students to do 2 semesters of research. So it's not a real compelling argument for integrating cures, but the good thing is that everyone's doing research anyway. So it's okay. It's not a selection pressure like it is in other settings. So Effie asked a question about, has course content learning been measured? So the problem is these are 30 different content areas. So of course, each course, just like you'd expect, they measure learning, right? I mean, they look at research products. Students are co-authors on papers, so clearly they're learning some things. The problem is you can't really look across the whole program at content knowledge because it's going to be different content for different research. Does that help? Yeah, it's a tough thing because you might think, oh, we can measure something about like expertise development, but expertise development is so discipline specific. I mean, people may think that if they have expertise in ecology, they're suddenly going to have expertise in other areas of biology, and that is just not true. That's why we rely on each other to help shore up those gaps. A good question about student authorship. Absolutely. So that's really also very discipline specific. So in some disciplines, anyone who does anything is an author. And some disciplines, the norm is very many fewer. And so the program doesn't have any stipulations about that. But oftentimes it's students who stay on for even more semesters past the end of their 2 semesters and really see a piece of work through. And students who make sort of less of a contribution might be acknowledged, but not co-authors. The Genomics Education Partnership is a massive cure program that has many institutions and classes contributing to a common co-authored paper. So they have something like 1,000 student authors. And I mean, it's a real tour de force to get all the students to sign off, basically to read, to annotate their contribution, to make sure that they have approved the paper. And I think that's super impressive, but that's really following Washington University at St. Louis's authorship policies. So Maria asked a question. Okay, Mary asked a question. Let me see, about limited lab space. Were labs built especially? No, actually, what was done was a lot of space was used from retired faculty. So instead of renovating lab space, because that's expensive, the lab space was turned over to these cures to use as their labs. So oftentimes 2 streams will share a space so that they have that dedicated lab space that's their space. Sometimes they operate in standard classrooms, like classroom labs, but then that's harder for the open lab concept. So using space from retired faculty has worked pretty well for them. And then Maria asked a question about the prestige of the journals. To be honest, I don't expect that that's evaluated. I sort of have mixed feelings about journal prestige. I know a lot of crap that gets published in very high prestige journals, and a lot of really good work gets published in journals that may be considered low prestige compared to, Cell Nature Science. So I'm all about evaluating the individual scholarship. And if you want to read more about that, there's the Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA, that is advocating for more appropriate standards for research assessment than relying on, for example, journal impact factors. So I'd encourage you to read that. Oh, how to get widespread research like this into non-R1s. So it's something that's interesting about, and by the way, I recognize that we're almost up on the hour, so I will not be offended if you need to leave, but I'm happy to hang out. So thank you very much for your attention if you need to leave. I appreciate your participation and questions. So non-R1 universities. So one of the things that's been kind of cool this semester, at Georgia at least, is that everyone's doing research remotely. Like we'll even have students doing field work like in their neighborhood, like collecting local samples on things or doing, work at a distance. And several faculty are like, so why can I not involve students from another university? And they did. They just did it. So we have actually quite a number of historically Black colleges and universities in Georgia, that some of which have really robust research infrastructure and some don't. And so we're actually partnering with several of them. And it's a win for us, right? Because we get more minds on the problem. And we also have an opportunity to recruit great students to come to grad school at UGA. So I think that one way to do that is to actually have institutional partnerships or faculty partnerships. And those students are earning credit at their own institution by basically having a partnership between their faculty mentor there and a faculty mentor at UGA. So I think that COVID in some ways has caused us to innovate and sort of break down some of those equity barriers.
All right. Well, like Erin mentioned, we are out of our regularly allotted 1 hour's time. I actually have to go meet with a student. My whole life is meetings these days. But that was a wonderful seminar. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording so you guys can speak freely for the next 30 minutes or so. So thanks again. And
enjoy your meetings. Enjoy your Zoom. So Christina, you asked a question or you made a comment about the cures being very faculty driven. So I assume you're very faculty driven means that it was not student driven. That's really what you're saying? It's like code.
Oh, no, I was trying to respond to the thought about generating cures at a non-R1.
Oh, yeah.
Just in terms of getting them there, it seemed like the faculty who wanted them were the ones that created them. And the faculty, like, it was not in any way a top-down thing, but I also went to college from 2008 to 2011. So that was, I don't know if the word cure had yet come up for what
Yeah.
they were doing, but once I learned what the word was, I was like, oh, I've done those.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that sometimes folks, that's exactly what they realize. They're like, oh, I've been engaging students in my research for a long time in my class because I just find it more interesting. And I also get, preliminary results. So yeah, no, absolutely. So individual faculty, I mean, it's just like anything, right? If you don't have sort of, you know what, I'm gonna pause the